Hi everyone, I'm Stephen Downs. Today I want to talk about the architecture of a distributed open learning system or a personal learning environment architecture. I'm going to go back a number of years and I'm going to talk about something that Michael Feldstein said all the way back in, I guess it would be, 2007. And what he said is, we need a system that is optimized towards slotting in new pieces as they become available, not as an afterthought or an add-on, but as a fundamental characteristic of the system. So what would such a system look like? I think that's a good question. Such a system would have to instantiate the personal learning architecture that we want to create that allows us to have distributed access to system resources as well as a distributed network of learners and other participants. So let's think about that. Let's think about just exactly what that would look like right now. Learning on this picture is a network phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that includes user-generated content, for example, Wikipedia. It's a phenomenon that includes social networks and communities, entails a genuinely portable and owned identity, networks of interactions, and a personal learning center. It was probably most prototypically diagrammed by Scott Wilson. This is back in 2005 or so. And we see the future virtual learning environment at the center, surrounded by various services that can be plugged in on an as-needed basis. Services including Flickr for photographs, 43 things for to-do lists, even a learning management system, even a blogging system, and more. Now, how do we build this network? Well, back in 2005, Charles Vest talked about three key attributes of a successful learning environment. Diversity, so it supports many objectives, many goals, many ways of doing things. Interwoven, so that we're able to attract and create network principles and network affordances. And open, so that new ideas can come in and it can export ideas to other places, other systems. Diversity is a response to the idea of making things the same. And it's a response to the idea of making anything the same as being fundamentally misguided. It's kind of ironic that in our educational system based in learning management systems and traditional colleges, etc., we value sameness so much more than we seem to value diversity. Interwoven is the idea that our different activities are distinct, but they're not distinct. We don't compartmentalize home and school and work. These are all aspects of a single overall integrated life that we lead. And open is the idea of having resources and services available, not just in closed silos or closed repositories, but available to the wider network. So this is basically what the architecture would look like. I've got resource profiles at the top, resource production, repositories, aggregation, etc. There are many different ways of representing this architecture. This is just the way I represented it. Let's look at resource profiles, because resource profiles is a fundamentally different way of looking at resources and data. Traditionally, we think one resource, one set of data. One resource, one set of descriptors. But in fact, for any kind of resource, there are many ways of looking at it, many ways of describing it. Look at, for example, a person. A person might have properties that are inherent to them, like their name or their age. They might have properties that a second party gives to them, like their credit card number, for example. And they might have properties that a third party uses to describe them, like, say, their passport number or their IQ. It's the same with things like books or other resources. First party metadata is the properties that are inherent to them, title, author, etc. Second party metadata is the property that a user of the book ascribes to it. So the user might provide a rating of the book, a time to have read it, etc. And third party metadata is what a third party would use to describe the book. A book review, for example, an ISBN or a topic. The idea here and the fundamental principle is we want to think of resources as something that can be described in many ways by many people using many different properties. There isn't any sense of the resource description being located in one single canonical place. The resource has to be described across different environments, different places. And if you think about it, that's what we do now outside of the world of educational resources. That's what we do now when we describe a person. That's what we do now when we describe a book. We need to store information about our objects, about our resources in many ways, and develop an architecture that allows all of these things to mesh together. So what else? What else do we have in our architecture? Too many buttons to click here. So we have resource production itself, and we need distributed mechanisms of resource production. You know, blogs and things like that helped us a lot when they came along because they gave everybody a way of producing a resource really easily. Now we have things like Facebook and Twitter, and we can produce resources almost instantly with our mobile phones, etc. But you know, the descriptions of these aren't good, and the editing tools aren't good, and we need something more integrated, more effective to allow us to create different kinds of resources and make them available in different formats, and especially to make them available outside the confines of blog or outside the confines of Facebook, etc. We want to be able to put the resources we create into what might be called repositories. We want to be able to create something anywhere and then store it any place that we want. There is a world of repositories out there. And we might even think of something like Blogger as a repository or Facebook as a repository, although they aren't very good ones. There's a specification called the Open Archives Initiative, which is a type of repository initiative. And MIT took that and created something called DSpace out of it. But the concept is the same. The concept is you create something, you upload it somewhere. Somewhere in the internet, somewhere in the cloud. You might use Dropbox, Amazon Web Services. It doesn't really matter. The main thing is you're able to upload the material in such a way that it is available for others to use at a later time. If we're going to upload these resources, we need to be able to talk about rights. Of course, we talk about Creative Commons a lot, and that's probably the principal way of describing the rights of an open educational resource. But it's not the only game in town. There's the Open Digital Rights Language, which is a specification that's been created by, well, it was created independently, but now it's part of the World Wide Web Consortium. Or we can even create our own rights profiles. That really should be up to us. And then these rights profiles should and will play a role in the type of access that we have and in the type of search that we undertake in order to find these resources. Resource aggregation is a major part of any open and distributed system. I've spent a lot of time on this over the years. The idea of resource aggregation actually is twofold. The first part of resource aggregation is actually being able to retrieve the resources from the various repositories where they're located around the world. The idea of aggregation is that you look and you see what's been created out there. So it's not so much a search as a harvest. You're gathering everything that there is. And then once you've gathered it, then you need to examine it according to your own criteria, sort it, organize it, filter it, extract objects from it, find who the author was, who the publisher was, if it's about a certain topic, etc. Organize that, throw that into your database. Why do you need to throw it into your database? Because you will use your database later on to do things like read the objects, rate the objects, tag the objects, and of course, ultimately forward a reference to the objects either in something that you've written or just as a reference that you think other people will find useful. All of this should happen in a common environment. There are many ways that a common environment can be created, but I've always used the very typical three-pane model as the way I begin thinking about these things. The left-hand side is the results of the aggregation. It's the list of resources that are available to you after they've been sorted and filtered, etc. The right upper hand pane is the big content creation pane. So we can view the resources, and then once we've viewed the resources, we can drag and drop bibliographical information about the resources or even some of the content into our authoring pane. And then finally, at the bottom right there is a window where we can access different services that our own system provides. I've got a find window in there, for example, but I could do things like select a template to work with, so on and so forth. Personal identity is also a major part of this. Now, some of these organizations on the right-hand side have basically died. MIDM, or Mighty Me, was a system that I created way back in the early 2000s, where your identity was put into the header of a browser, and then anytime you accessed a website, you would present your credentials. The browser would do this automatically, and then you could exchange information back and forth. Today, we have a system called OAuth and OAuth 2 that does a lot of that same sort of thing for you. And again, it allows you to have an identity that you control and you own as you go from place to place to place. Your personal learning environment needs to be the repository for your personal identity. The environment interface, the idea here is that what we have in our distributed network should be accessible from any number of devices. I've got the typical web browser here on the left, but it should also be accessed by mobile device. Don't you love that ancient mobile device? Or even accessed by your toaster. Why not? The idea here is that it's a distributed system, and the information that you've aggregated and you've created should now be available for reuse by any of the systems or devices that you own. Reuse, in other words, meaning that it can bring in information that you've created or information about you in order to manage how it functions. Your toaster should be able to learn over time how dark you like your toast, or whether you want a map of Europe printed on your toast. Up to you. Content syndication is the idea behind you sharing your content with other people. There are different ways of doing that. One way of content syndication is to share information about how you've used your resources, evaluations you've made, the fact that you've viewed something, a comment that you've made, a tag that you've made, etc. As well, content syndication is the idea of you being able to share the resources that you've created, whether they're events that you've planned, biographical sketches, images, articles, whatever. You should be able to post them to your repository network out there somewhere, and then provide metadata information about them in a syndicated format. RSS, Atom, these days JSON is another popular one, etc. All of this feeds into the community that you're a part of. Through syndication and through projection of your identity, you are becoming a part of that community. You are interacting with the other members of that community, and they are interacting with you. There are dozens of ways of organizing this community, and I won't get into all of that at this time, but you can have communities, groups, lists, etc. The main point here is that your personal learning environment provides a window to the various places where you congregate with other people. If you get together on Facebook, your personal learning environment is a window to Facebook. If you get together in Google Groups, it is a window to Google Groups. So what's the takeaway here? Well, Charles Vest talked about a meta university those many years ago. If I may be so audacious, and I will be so audacious, this is the architecture for that meta university. These are the basic components that you need. And this set of slides that I'm working with, I created those, I don't know, 10 years ago. These concepts haven't changed since. Oh, there have been new technologies and new approaches, etc. But the overall components and the overall mechanisms haven't changed. This is the kind of architecture that we are slowly, ever so slowly, working toward as we develop a personal learning environment, open education network. So that's it for today. I'm Stephen Downs, and I look forward to talking to you again.